fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
I never read so deeply into this person's story. I'd never read so deeply into the sheer volume of evidence and statements that Jacqueline gave the police. And I certainly had never heard one of the detectives say, we're not even sure if we tested it. What are your reactions to hearing that list? And I know you already know about it. There's no...
Hello. It's been quite a long time since I've done a live. Timmy's definitely, come on, up, come on, up, jump, come on, jump, hey, jump. Okay, let's give him a bit of time. I think he's got stage fright. There we go. So this is Timmy, guys. It's also been a long time since he's assumed the position for the lives. Good to see you guys. Kitty Bennett, Laura May, Natalie, Tougher Guy, and all of you guys. So we just heard Ashley Banfield saying she's never gone so deeply into this aspect of the case. Now, not quite sure whether she means, did she just not know about the Chris Wolf case? Because if that's the case, that's strange, right? Does she mean she's never gone this deeply into the his accuser's story? And I mean, I guess that's I guess that's understandable because no one has. But then I think one can also ask the question, should we be going that deeply into a story given what's going on? And so we are going to go into a story. She wrote a book about this case. You guys may be thinking, well, if I'm covering this, it must be really important. He must be an important witness in some sense. And yeah, it's true. In some sense, he is an important witness. I see, according to the poll, that most of you who know about this case seem to say that he's not an important suspect. 37% say no, but then 51% say you don't know. So I'm not going to tell you guys what I think right now. I'll get to that a little bit later. But it is quite a big jump. 8% think he is an important suspect. 3% say, well, there was a lawsuit, so he must be. But 51% say you don't know. And so it's for your benefit that we're going to kind of go into this the way we are. So let's just go back a little bit and listen to what Ashley Banfield said again. Let's go back to 7 seconds.
Into this person's story. I'd never read so deeply into the sheer volume of evidence and statements that Jacqueline gave the police. And I certainly had never heard one of the detectives say, we're not even sure if we tested it. What are your reactions to hearing that list? And I know you...
Hold on. And then she says, I know no one knows this case better than you do.
You already know about it. There's no one who knows more about this case than you. But what's...
Now, I've kind of got a problem with Ashley Banfield saying that, where she says, no one knows this case better than you do, given that John Ramsey at a certain time, he was asked, who is your prime suspect? And he said Santa Claus. I mean, that's just like a serious answer. Now, I think someone saying, I think Santa Claus killed JONBENET, I think that gives you an idea what someone's grasp is of this case. Is there anyone, you know, when you ask, who are the suspects in this case? Who's your number one candidate? Is Santa Claus in the top 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10? He shouldn't be. And yet, when John was questioned officially by the police, he mentioned Santa Claus. He also mentioned, I think the Ramsey somewhere along the line mentioned Fleet White, but also his colleague. So if you think about the people John is suspected of being the perpetrator, they are not terribly credible or convincing after you've spent time investigating them. So does John really know the case so well? I mean, by his own account, John was sleeping when the incident happened. He said didn't he say he took a melatonin or something, and then woke up the next morning. So also Patsy found the note, and Patsy sort of did the initial. So is John really the best person to ask about this? It's an interesting question. Someone says, who is Linda Hoffman Pugh? Diane says, no, not Santa Claus. So we're going to talk about this article. Let me put it on screen. When Ashley Banfield says, I never knew about this case so deeply, I think she's really referring to this story. Can you guys see on the screen? My girlfriend told police I murdered JONBENET. Here's the truth about her sick claims, meaning his girlfriend, and why I still love her. Let's just play a little clip out of this.
I had absolutely nothing at all to do with the murder of JONBENET Ramsey. I think that when I sort of reacted sort of cynically to the news, all the hysteria around JONBENET Ramsey, I didn't seem sympathetic, I guess, to Jackie. And I think she was angry with me and resentful. And she conflated in her mind me breaking up with her with JONBENET being murdered. They're only interested in me in the sense that they have to answer questions from the people who are the suspects, the attorneys for the people who are the suspects, the people who are defending the people who are the suspects.
Okay, so there you have it. So we're going to kind of go into the story, and it definitely is pretty interesting. It definitely is a pretty interesting story. Just not sure whether I'm going to be able to access it on this computer. Didn't see that one coming. Just a second. Okay, so Jacqueline Dilson wrote this book. Let me just put that on screen. And I'm not really here to promote her book. I've never been in contact with her, but she wrote this book on the Ramsey case. It's the latest book on the Ramsey case, The Unheard Call, self-published, Jacqueline Dilson's ordeal with the untrained Boulder, Colorado police in the JONBENET Ramsey murder. And you can kind of tell that this is a sort of a complaint against Boulder PD for not taking her seriously. And so you can almost imagine that John would like this story because it's a story about the Boulder police not entertaining every single theory and every single crackpot and every single accusation to the nth degree. And of course, it also includes, I guess, that's not really the word I'm looking for. It also incorporates the intruder theory. So someone like Chris Wolf would be intruder candidate, someone who came from outside the home inside, someone who lived in Boulder, and something to that degree. But then you'd have to look at other things like, does his handwriting correspond? And also, what interest did he have in JONBENET leading up to that? And had anyone seen him with JONBENET before that and all that kind of thing? And of course, on the other side of it is, and this is the part that you'd expect John to talk to, this aspect, is there any evidence implicating Chris Wolf besides what his ex-girlfriend, his disenfranchised, not very happy ex-girlfriend? Remember, he was breaking up with her, so she wasn't very happy with that. And it was, you've got to remember that in context, that they were breaking up, and in the context of the breakup, she implicated him. Now you might say, yeah, but surely time heals all wounds, and it's been a lot of time since then, and surely she's not still bitter. Interesting question. I haven't read the book, so I don't know what the answer is. Gority says, what is hidden in the dark will be exposed by the light. It's a nice thought. I'm not sure if that's true, though. It takes effort to do that, to expose things. And even then, do people see and do people notice, right? So so that's the book she's written. Let's just see if I can... So Banfield asked John for his reaction to the evidence, which is, what is the evidence in this case? What's basically hearsay from Jackie Dawson. As I say, Wolf's not terribly happy girlfriend at the time. And so what do you think John's response is to that question, right? What do you think of the evidence?
What's your reaction to this?
Well, yeah, some of the items you mentioned, I didn't know about. I know Jackie came to us early on. We'd hired our own investigators, and she'd come to us, I think, out of frustration with the police, and related pretty much the same thing that you just went through.
So that's John's initial response, is basically that whole spiel about the police being a problem, right? Basically, the question is, what do you think of this guy as a suspect? What do you think of the evidence? And he starts off saying, well, the police didn't take it seriously, complaining against the police.
To us, and pretty compelling. And
that's really his response. That's really his response to the question, what do you think of the evidence? He says, pretty compelling. Now, you've got to think about it. John's got to be careful with, he's got to be very careful here, because the last time they wrote about Chris Wolf, meaning John and Patsy, and they went well beyond one or two words, they ended up in court. So he has to choose his words carefully. Now, you can imagine a reporter harping at John, just tell us if you think he did it or not. Just tell us, do you think it's Chris Wolf? Is he your prime suspect? Even if John did think or does think Chris Wolf is a credible suspect, which I highly doubt, why can't he just say Chris Wolf did it? Any ideas? Let me turn this over to chat right now. If, yeah, that's it. If John thinks that it's compelling, can't he just say, you know, if he believes it is Chris Wolf, can't he just say, I think Chris Wolf killed JONBENET, or Chris Wolf killed JONBENET? Can he say that? Anyone know why he can't say that and why he wouldn't say that? That's the simple answer. It's quite simple. And he didn't even say it in those many words in the book, The Death of Innocence. He didn't say Chris Wolf did it. He said, this is another candidate suspect, I think, besides, I think he also mentioned the housekeeper, and I think she sued him as well. That's why, right? Because of legal ramifications. Someone says crying wolf. That's another answer, that there ultimately wasn't any evidence. If there's evidence to implicate, and then Chris Wolf could be taken to trial, then John would have every right to say Chris Wolf did it, because then he could defend that with evidence. But can he? And I want you to think about the same question when you guys want to hear, who do you think did it, right? Because I know there are YouTubers who will happily tell you what you want to hear, and they get shitloads of views. I can think of one in particular. He's very happy to tell you exactly what you want to hear. And what do you think could happen in a situation like that? What do you think has happened in a situation like that? This is a very legally sensitive case, and if you follow some of the investigators, they've been pretty careful, and they've been sued anyway. Detective Steve Thomas, James Kolar. They've been quite they've been quite careful in how they express themselves, and they've been sued anyway, right? So when someone tells you something about someone else, and here I'm talking about, remember, John is a former suspect, Patsy was a former suspect. When someone tells you something about someone else, you need to consider the context. In the same way, when Jackie Dilson is telling you something about someone else, about Chris Wolf, you need to consider the context, and that's the context we need to consider here. Is it a standalone story, or do they have an axe to grind, right? So I think you can ask the same question. Does John have an axe to grind with anyone? Is he just trying to find the killer of JONBENET, or does he have a bit of I don't want to say a grudge, but does he have some bad feelings about Boulder PD? Does he not like the way he was treated by Boulder PD? In the same way, Jackie Dilson didn't like what happened between her and Chris Wolf at the time that JONBENET died. That's when he broke up with her, right? And there's actually more to it than that. We're going to get to that in a second. And so you've got to always ask, does someone have a personal stake in you believing their story about someone else? And ultimately, is it independent, or is there bias built into why they're telling their story? Does that make sense? And so I think you've got to ask at the end of the day. I mean, I'm always asking this question when I tell stories relating to JONBENET or any true crime case. And that is, what is ultimately the value of the story? What is ultimately the value of this evidence, right? And that is what makes the Chris Wolf case really, really interesting, is that it does have value. Let's go to that right now.
My name is JONBENET Ramsey, and I'm 7.
Hello, and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this series, we're going to look at the Carnes order. And in a nutshell, the Carnes order was basically the answer to the question, if the Ramsey case went to trial, what would have happened? In the So, you hear about that quite a lot. It's hard to avoid thinking about that. Just this idea, if only the Ramsey case went to trial, if only a judge, or not in this case, a judge did hear it, but if only a jury beyond the grand jury heard this trial. And in this case, it did go to trial. Well, there was a lawsuit, and a judge pronounced on the outcome. That's Judge Julie Carnes. And so the value of the Wolf case is that a judge, not a jury, not a grand jury, and not a jury, but a judge, actually, so a learned legal professional, listened to a lot of evidence related to the handwriting experts, related to the intruder theory, related to a lot of this evidence, actually heard the evidence and made a pronouncement. And that makes the Wolf case really important and valuable, because it amounted to a retesting, essentially, of evidence, right? So that is the value of the Chris Wolf case. And if you guys want to find out what happened in the Carnes order, I've got a whole series on that. But before we get to that, I just want to reiterate that the Ramseys made multiple references, over a dozen references over several pages, to Chris Wolf in their book, The Death of Innocence. That's actually why he sued them, because of what they said about him in their book. Now, can you guys see on screen, there's a website from A Candy Rose that's got the entire index of the book summarized according to the letters of the alphabet. So there you can see Cabell. Can you guys see that? There you can see Cabell, Cable Company, California Electronics Company, Camera Crew, Cancer. Look at all of those references. Cancer Patient as well. and this is all under just C. Car phone, let's have a look. Case against Patsy Ramsey, just one reference. What else? Celebrities, cellar door, certain realities. But what we really want to look at, see how it like goes on and on and on and on. And then eventually look at all those references to Charlie Brennan and Charlevoix and chastising. Something about Booth, not sure what that is. That's Dr. Booth. And then we want to look at, there's also not that much reference to SA, but there is some. And then also Chris Wolf, there it is. There are the references to Chris Wolf. Lainey, thanks very much for that. Appreciate it. Chris Wolf, page 204, 5, 221, 271, 329. He accused Lockheed Martin of selling arms to South America. He had a master's degree in journalism. So, if you think about it, it does seem like whoever wrote the ransom note was something of a wordsmith. And so in that sense, well, maybe it could be him. He's the kind of guy who might say attaché. He's the kind of guy who might say and hence, right? So there's a little bit of meat and potatoes to it from a distance. He was arrested for public indecency while the plot thickens. He had photos of JONBENET from newspapers. He also had that, right? He moved into a trailer with Jackie Dilson. So that kind of gives you an idea. Maybe he was struggling financially, and the ransom note was sort of implied someone who needed a relatively small amount of money. Thank you, Sarah. I must say, Sarah, I see you quite a lot on X. Thanks for that. And also thanks, Mrs. Tabs. Appreciate it. I'll do a Q&A. I just want to see where we are in terms of the goal. If we reach 30 super chats, then I'll do a quick Q&A with you guys. I'm not sure if we're going to get there, though, but we'll see. Yeah, so let's bring the screen back up. He moved into a trailer, refused to write words from the ransom note, which is quite interesting. Although I think that should say he initially refused to write words. He was a reporter for the Boulder County Business Report. So wouldn't that mean he would have known about John Ramsey's business? He was also a reporter for the Colorado Daily. He was given a sweatshirt with SBTC on it, meaning I think it was Santa Barbara Tennis Club. So he literally had a shirt with SBTC on it, Santa Barbara Tennis Club. That's also fairly compelling if you think about it. Then he went into an angry tirade, as reported by Jacqueline Dilson. I don't think Jackie Dilson is ever mentioned in their book. And then there it is. Chris Wolf went onto our suspect list. And that's just a very brief summary of the references to Chris Wolf in the Death of Innocence. Okay. So if you, for those of you who don't know about this case, you can read about the whole case at this link. I'll put the link in chat. Wolf versus Ramsey, it was decided in 2003, March 31st, 2003. And as you can see, it's quite a case. This is it. You're welcome to go and read about that on your own time, or you can listen to the Carnes order playlist. I've got a playlist that summarizes this case in about 21 episodes, so you might find that interesting as well. Polar Vortex says, thanks for the info. James, you're not the only one. The live format's also not my favorite format, so yeah, I'm probably not going to be doing this again in a hurry. there's also an abbreviated version of the errors in the Carnes order on Reddit. Can you guys see that? I don't often highlight Reddit. I'm not particularly a fan of Reddit, but they do have their moments. 41 inaccuracies from the Carnes ruling. You know, the fact that they've identified 41, and maybe some of them are dubious, but it's not like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 20. It's a lot. It really is a lot. So there is kind of what is really interesting with the Chris Wolf as a suspect and then the lawsuit is how a judge dealt with the evidence. Like if you might have a criticism against Alex Hunter, but then you end up having a similar criticism against Judge Judy Carnes. Like, wow, how could you think that? How could you say that? And I think a lot of what goes on in the Ramsey case is people rely on the insights, assessments, observations of people that come before them. And let me give you a good example. What is a good example? I don't want to talk about footprints in the snow. Here's a good example. You had that CBS docuseries where they literally show JONBENET taking a piece of pineapple from a bowl of a bowl, right? And then I guess Burke runs after her, and a lot of people think, yeah, that makes sense. I don't think it makes sense. I think some of the analysis does make sense, but that part doesn't make any sense to me. But there are a lot of people who just go, yeah, that makes sense. You know, it's kind of someone's done all the thinking for you, and then you just take the baton and run with it. And as a result, I'm just saying that's one example where people will just go, someone else thought about that situation. But there's no proof there's no fingerprints on the flashlight. There's no damage to the flashlight. And I personally don't even think the flashlight's the murder weapon. And it doesn't explain to me in a convincing way the neck injury or the other aspect that took place as well. Or even this whole idea that, according to some experts, both the asphyxia and the blunt force trauma happened at the same time. It doesn't explain that. And so I don't accept it. But there are a lot of people who go, a lot of people say this, and so I accept it and they take it further. And then there are a lot of people who say, well, Lou Smith said that, well, I agree, and they take that further. And then there are people with a snow, no snow. And I find that in particular very weird. It's like, this is not rocket science. I was actually walking in a field the other day, and I didn't sort of notice there no footprints. What I noticed was after I crossed the field and I looked back, I saw my footprints. And then I realized, I guess I'm the only one here because I can see my footprints. That's exactly what the officer experienced. But you're only going to make that observation if there is dew or snow or frost to begin with. You're not going to say, well, there's no footprints or there are footprints if there's no snow. It's like saying, you're not going to notice if it rained or if it didn't rain on a sunny day. You just wouldn't think about it that way. The point that I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of people borrowing from the research of others. And so when one note is off, well, then that note repeats ad nauseum because people aren't thinking for themselves. And what's really needed in the Ramsey case is someone to come independently to the Ramsey case and think about all of the information and in an integrated way, all of the information, and then make sense of it in a way that integrates with everything. And there are very few people, that can do that, but also there are very few people that have the stomach for that or the stamina for that, because there's a shitload of information. Who's got the time to read all the books and read all the reports and reconcile the stuff? And who's got the discernment to say that information is worth paying attention to and that information isn't? Does that make sense? Eve of the West says, I'm in Colorado. It was snowing white out this morning. Oh, okay. Snow mostly melted. I mean, that's the other thing is you must think about the snow narrative in context. At what time was the snow observed and at what time was the snow photographed? There's a big difference between those. A critical thinker, that is what is needed. And then there are fewer around than you might think. Okay. I don't know why I've had this Reddit post on for so long on screen. There is Chris Wolf's press card from 1993, Colorado Working Press. Like I say, you can also look at my 21 episode analysis on the Carnes order. Here it is. Can you guys see that on screen? Let's just go through a couple of the titles. If only the JONBENET Ramsey case went to trial. Well, it sort of did. That came out also in the Carnes order. Did John tell Boulder PD about the broken open window? Dark animal hairs found on JONBENET's hands. Did you guys know that? JONBENET fought her attacker in some manner. Did you guys know that? Did the Ramsey housekeeper recognize the handwriting that also came up in the Carnes order? And then the other handwriting experts were simply afraid to state what they believed. That's also in the Carnes order. Ramsey's provided all evidence requested by the police except someone's medical, what does it say? No, it's not showing me. There it is. Burke's medical records. Was data stolen from the JONBENET Ramsey war room computer? That's another, what do they call it? Just a little bit of intrigue surrounding the whole case. Carnes introduces the list 18 years before revelatory documentary. In other words, she introduces a list of who she considers suspects. And then this is it. This is the killer, John Ramsey, quoted by Judge Julie Carnes. I'm not quite sure who he was referring to there. Something I've wanted to do for a long time, I just haven't really gotten around to it, is talking about the Lindbergh kidnapping as an analogy for the Ramsey case. There are some very interesting comparisons to draw between the two. That's also very interesting from a legal perspective. Once you've conceded the possibility of an intruder, it's game over. Think about that. Think about that from a legal perspective. As soon as, whether you're a juror or a prosecutor, as soon as you concede that the possibility of an intruder is there, well, then there's kind of reasonable doubt, isn't there? And that, I think, is the brilliance in a way of the Ramsey case, is it has convinced so many people of the not only the possibility of an intruder. There are a lot of people, when I say a lot, I think it's the minority, but it's still a decent amount of people believe that it's possible. And so if you have a jury of 12 people, it would only take one or two to go, yeah, but I think there's a chance that the intruder theory could be true. Well, then you've lost your case. Did the Ramseys maliciously accuse Chris Wolf, or did they genuinely believe? And that was part of what the case revolved around. If you think about defamation and slander, one of the tests for that, one of the legal tests is, was it done maliciously? And Judge Julie Carnes believed that it wasn't malicious, that they genuinely thought, I guess, that he could be a suspect. So that's why I think it's quite interesting to watch John Ramsey now and say, what do you think of the evidence? And he says, very compelling. But doesn't he know that DNA excluded him, that there was no evidence connecting him? Anyway, let's go back to this. How do you prove you're not guilty? That's just a statement Patsy made. And then these last couple, grand jury investigation proves Patsy was not involved. That's from the Carnes order. That's quite an interesting conclusion drawn by Judge Julie Carnes. I don't know what she based it on. Did she base it on the handwriting analysis? Did she base it on what Alex Hunter said in a bit of a not transparent way. There on the wine cellar door, there's a palm print that does not match. That also came up in the Carnes order. A reasonable jury could not conclude that Patsy was the author of the ransom note. That also came up in the Carnes order. Do you guys agree with that? Do you agree that a reasonable jury could not conclude that Patsy was the author of the ransom note? Because the housekeeper made quite a compelling case on her own that she thought she recognized the handwriting. And she was the only outsider who was in that position to say, wow, I was seeing these notes lying around all the time. And there were notes all over, and Patsy was constantly writing me notes and, did you recognize the handwriting? So that's quite compelling testimony from the housekeeper. And in the final episode, why do you mention him in your book? And that's Katie Couric to John Ramsey, meaning Chris Wolf. And that's just another reference to it. So I do recommend you guys watch this playlist because it raises so many other areas. It opens up so many doors to other evidence and statements that we otherwise wouldn't have had without this accusation and lawsuit, right? Okay. Right, so I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit, I think on this computer, I don't have access to the story that I want to share with you guys. So I might need to run off to my other computer and just send it to this computer, like as a Word document or something. So can you guys excuse me for 1 minute? Is that all right with you guys? I think while I'm away, we can maybe play the rest of maybe this video. Just see where we are with the chat goals. I see we had 6 out of 30. Goal ends in an hour. Let's just have a look at the poll. 43% say they don't think Chris Wolf's a serious suspect, and 48% say you don't know. What do you guys think now, given what I've just said to you guys? What do you think now? Would you want to change your vote? Okay, I'm going to put this on screen. I'll be back in 30 seconds to a minute. Okay. Previous series, the JONBENET series, we really looked at debunking the intruder theory, and this series is going to be basically the opposite. It's going to be looking at how a judge found the intruder theory to be valid, and that judge was Judge Carnes. So when many of us are thinking, gosh darn it, if only this case had gone to trial, the Carnes order gives us a glimpse at what could have happened if the case did go to trial, and it may not have turned out quite the way perhaps some people would have hoped. So in this series, I'm going to take you through the 93-page opinion, the order issued by U.S. District Judge Julie Carnes. The Carnes ruling was based on a civil suit which flowed out of a defamation lawsuit against the Ramseys, and this came from Chris Wolf, who felt that he was being unfairly accused in their book, The Death of Innocence. And what he felt was, he felt that the way that they pointed the finger at him was malicious, meaning the way he saw it, the Ramseys knew that he didn't do it because they knew they did it. So that was Wolf's argument, and it is quoted very succinctly in the NBC Dateline documentary from 2016 by Charlie Brennan. So if you're interested in the coverage of the Carnes order, it'll be a series of around about 10 episodes. Please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment. Thank you to the 100 or so who have subscribed since the last video. Right, and let's get started. So unfortunately for us, and unfortunately for the JONBENET Ramsey case, when I say us, I mean some of us on a certain side of the fence, the judge referred to Steve Thomas's work, his book, as basically the other side of the story, basically Chris Wolf's supporting documents, which is essentially that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note at the crime scene and murdered her daughter. So you've got the judge dealing with the evidence against the Ramseys, right? And it is basically framed within Steve Thomas's narrative that Patsy did it, right? And the Ramseys then fought against these accusations, and we're going to see what the result was that Judge Julie Carnes found and what she ordered. So according to the order on September 30th, 2002, the defendants, being John and Patsy Ramsey, filed a notice of objection to the plaintiff's statement of material facts. And we're going to really pick it up on page 4 of the Carnes order, dealing with the timeline of the crime and crime scene. Now, what's very interesting as we go through this is the opinion that the judge draws based on the information. And what I'm going to do as we go through it is basically stop every now and then and say, hold on a second, is that necessarily accurate? Has the judge assessed this in a way that is likely, in a way that is reasonable, in a way that is based on the facts? Okay, so this is quoting from the Carnes order, page 4, the timeline of the crime and the crime scene. Sometime on the night of December 25th or the early morning of December 26th, 1996, JonBenet Ramsey was murdered. And this is the first reference to a statement of material facts, right? JonBenet's body was found in the basement of the defendant's home. This is, again, a statement of material fact and the plaintiff's statement of material facts. I'm not going to refer to them every single time, but it basically refers. So that statement of material fact, let's see if I can just bring that up. Where is it? That's not that. Can you guys see on this screen? Let me just bring it up a little bit more. There it is, SMF, Statement of Material Fact, right? I can't quite remember what PSMF is. Does anyone know? PSMF, it's something Statement of Material Fact. Maybe it's presumed. I'm not sure. Anyone know what PSMF is? I should know since I've covered this. I just can't quite remember. Is Cotton Star here? Let's listen to a little bit more from this. Where were we? Just to where the plaintiff and the material facts basically agree with one another. I think let's just go into what they are going to be referred to here. There's the statement of material facts, the plaintiff statement of material fact. Okay, there you have it. Plaintiff statement of material fact. Plaintiff statement. So that's a little bit different. Okay, so yeah, the good news is I've found the I've managed to send myself the document. So we're going to look at that in a second. It comes from the Daily Mail. And yeah, we're going to basically go through that. Sorry, I just don't know why I wasn't able to access it on this computer. So I'm just going to go through the story from the Daily Mail. It just really is a very interesting narrative. Okay. Can you guys see that? So the source of this is the Daily Mail. Chris Wolf was driving near his home in Boulder County in late January 1997 when he saw red lights flashing in his rearview mirror. Police had already pulled him over a few days earlier. That's also quite interesting. You know, so he was someone who was I don't want to, he definitely wasn't in trouble with the law, but he was to some extent familiar with law enforcement. And he was kind of in a bad mood. He was in no mood for another drawn out conversation. And this probably made things worse. He said, "Can't you find something better to do?" And then he said, "You can't even solve the Ramsey murder." And that wisecrack turned out to be anything but. They say here, Jacqueline Dilson had just implicated him in the very same murder. The pageant queen, okay, I'm not going to go into that. She told police, and this is the part that I guess is quite important. She said that Wolf had disappeared for hours on Christmas night, and she awoke in the early hours to find him showering and his clothes streaked with mud. Right? And I think what you would need to ascertain there is how many hours had he disappeared? Because if the Ramsey scenario holds true, then he should have disappeared when they went to dinner. So around about, what is it? I can't actually quite remember now. Is it 5 p.m., 4 or 5 p.m.? And then, so was he gone already at 4 or 5 p.m.? In order for that scenario to hold true, that he was writing the ransom note while they were out, and he was familiarizing himself with the house while they were out, right? And the other thing that you'd also want to look at is, his clothes were streaked with mud. So did he slip and slide anywhere in the garden? And if she's finding mud inside her home, why is there not mud inside the Ramsey home? It's quite a simple thing. He went from the garden inside the home, right? Mud outside, mud inside. Now he comes back and he's still got mud on his clothes. Why is there not mud in the Ramsey crime scene, right? Anyway, then she writes, citing a series of bizarre actions and obscene statements made about the Ramseys, Dilson told Boulder PD. So in other words, part of what she really didn't like was that he kept bringing them up and complaining about them and I guess making unsavory comments about them. And this, in a way, was a red flag to her. But I'm not sure how many people in Boulder didn't do that. I've been to Boulder myself. I've had conversations with Boulderites myself. And some of them don't mince words about their feelings about the case. And this is 20 odd years later. Anyway, it says here, for Wolf, that stop would mark the beginning of a nightmare that continues to haunt him 28 years on. And there he is. And, I think there's something in true crime that I really don't like. And I think now is maybe a good time to say it. And I think this is a good analogy. In the Delphi case, I really get the sense that people don't like the fact that Richard Allen is the perpetrator. Is not bad enough, is not bad looking enough, is not scary enough. People can't sort of believe that this monster that they've been fearing for so long turns out to be this small little harmless looking pharmacy worker, right? Do you know what I mean? So in other words, people have this pre-programmed idea that bad people look clearly bad, like you see in the movies, and good people look handsome and whatnot, right? And so if you think about some of the bad guys in this case, John Mark Carr, Gary Oliver, they sort of fit that profile of, he must be a really horrible person to commit this crime. Can't he be actually a nice person? Think about Chris Watts. Think about Scott Peterson. Nice looking people commit horrible crimes all the time. Think about Ted Bundy. Why must they fit this sort of cliched profile of someone who looks creepy? Like Ted Bundy. And so, you've got a similar scenario where you say, well, you know what? I wonder whether Chris Wolf could have committed the crime because of the way he looks. Is that a very scientific way of thinking about it? And I have to say, you know, I wrote about this case, I think for the first time in 2016, almost 10 years ago. And there was nothing about Chris Wolf. The only information you could get about him was in the Carnes order. It's really interesting that all of this time later, you have a Netflix docuseries that comes out, which I think then leads to his ex-girlfriend writing a book, and then he participates in that. Now, I'm not sure whether he's doing it to clear his name, which would make sense, but it could also be because at the same time in this article, they're promoting a book. And I can't help thinking about that because I'm someone who's written a lot of books, and I also want to promote my books. And it's quite interesting that he participates in this whole thing. Maybe it's journalistic integrity or being a professional journalist. You say, well, there's a book about this guy, and give the guy the right of reply. I don't know if that's what's going on. But it is interesting that obviously him participating probably is going to lead to more of these books being sold. Him allowing himself to be photographed, you'd think that he would want privacy. You'd think that he would want to remain anonymous, because Lord knows I wouldn't know what he looked like based on those original photographs of him. Let's see if we can bring up a couple. I mean, if you only had that photo to work with, right? Or you only had this photo to work with, or you only had this photo to work with, right? Would you know this is what he looks like today? I wouldn't. So it seems like a little bit weird to me that he is saying, hey, here I am. And I didn't like being accused, and seems a little strange. I mean, all he would need to do is really stay silent, right? Okay, let's continue with this article. It's a picture of JONBENET. There's a picture of Jackie Dilson today, what she looks like today. And so, yeah, they say Jackie Dilson has been quietly accusing Chris Wolf of the crime for years. She's now going public with the alleged claims in the book and spoke exclusively to Daily Mail about the evidence. Okay, this is not what I want to go through. Let's just get off that. So apparently there was a stop, a traffic stop, and that was a ruse in terms of Boulder PD. Wolf was detained on trumped-up traffic charges, placed in handcuffs, hauled to the Boulder police station where two detectives were waiting for him in an interrogation room. And then they said, tell us everything you know about JONBENET Ramsey. And that was from none other than Steve Thomas, right? Now, think about what Boulder PD have been saddled with, that they've had this sort of tunnel vision where they've only suspected the Ramseys. Well, if you look at what happened here, this is quite a hands-on, aggressive, assertive move from Boulder PD. It's like, well, we've heard someone say something, let's talk to this guy. It's not as though they were sort of, hi, we heard this, ha, 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 whatever. It seems like they've taken it very seriously. And not only that, they even sort of did it kind of mischievously. They didn't really have a real reason to bring him into custody, right? And anyway, let's deal with the story. Wolf's blood ran cold. He told Thomas he knew nothing about the murder and that police time would be better spent talking to someone who did, namely JONBENET's parents, John and Patsy, who were both by then under Toronto public scrutiny. Now, can you imagine if this happened to you? Can you imagine if you were driving around Boulder, let's say you lived in Boulder, and you'd just broken up with your ex-girlfriend, and the next thing the police stop you and they say, tell us everything you know about JONBENET Ramsey, and you wouldn't almost the average person say, why are you talking to me? Shouldn't you be talking to John and Patsy? Like, literally, why are you talking to me? They should be talking to the police, right? So I'm just saying it's not that unreasonable what he was saying to them, perhaps a little bit cheeky, but not unreasonable, right? So then he said that was a real shock. This is, as a 65-year-old, this is what he told the Daily Mail. And it's the first time he's spoken about it in 20 years. And it's regarding the sales of his ex-girlfriend's book. He says, I was outraged because I felt like a lot of people did, that I knew who the real suspects were, and it certainly wasn't me. And again, I can't help reading those words thinking, yeah, that sounds quite reasonable. Then they write, things got worse for Wolf when he refused to supply police with handwriting and DNA samples. Now you can imagine this now makes it quite a good story from the perspective of if you lose Smith and you're saying, this guy doesn't want to cooperate. He's got something. Why is he not cooperating? Because he's got something to hide, right? And this is where you've got to be careful projecting into the Ramsey case, where because of your own biases, you're not seeing the woods for the trees. You are seeing your woods for the trees, right? And so Wolf is, I think you've got to look at it from another perspective as well. What kind of guy is Chris Wolf, right? And to me, he strikes him as a guy with a, how can I put it? He's got a bit of personality. So to me, it makes sense that he would say, you want this stuff from me? Stop investigating me. I haven't done anything wrong. Now, another person would say, perhaps, I'm innocent, so I'll give you the information you want. I don't really like it, but I'm not going to argue with you. And they would give it over, and that would clear that person. And the end of the story, and this is quite important to stress, it's one thing to say, whoa, I smell a rat here. The fact that he doesn't want to give this information, I think he's hiding something, right? But at the finish line of this, he does give what they asked him, because by then his distrust of the police and his distrust of the whole situation was sort of ameliorated. Was the police convinced him that, first of all, they didn't really suspect him, which I believe is true. And they said, you know why we need this information from you? So that we can exclude you, right? It's a little bit like saying, we don't suspect you, but can you take a polygraph? And then you pass the polygraph and then bye-bye, right? Of course, you could get into trouble. What if the evidence comes back? What if you were in that house? But generally speaking, yeah, I mean, he did give them DNA, and guess what happened with the DNA? He did give them handwriting, and guess what happened with the handwriting, right? So he was threatened at the time. Let's go back to that. By the way, thank you to Rolana. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Where are we with our goal? We are at 10 out of 30. Are we going to make it? Goal ends in about half an hour. Do you know what the goal is? Once we reach 30 super chats, I'll host a quick Q&A session. I'll take some of your questions. Are we going to get there? Let's see. Anyway, thank you to the 10 of you who have given super chats. I appreciate it. Was it just another one? I see there's like a yellow super chat. Let me just acknowledge that one. Just a second. There it is. Nina Steele, thank you very much. Eve of the West says, let me know how to contact you. You can contact me on X. Probably the best way. Okay, so he's threatened with obstruction charges. And this shows that he is quite a kind of aggressive guy in some way. He had to be restrained. I don't know if that's true. Maybe he was just a little bit unruly. He had to be restrained in handcuffs. Oh, that is after becoming aggressive when officers tried to take his picture. Now you can understand he doesn't want to lose his job. He also doesn't want to be photographed and his photo put in newspapers. He's a reporter himself. You can imagine he doesn't really want his picture taken. Marcel, thanks a lot for that. So he says, at some point I started to panic. It started to sink in that they're trying to pin this murder on me. And he said that was terrifying. And there have been other people who have been terrified by the Ramsey case as well, like Melody Stanton, who didn't want to talk to anyone because of the media shitstorm, and Luther Stanton, her husband. Thanks, Laura May. Thanks, Heavenly. Okay, let's continue. Wolf said he was terrified of being dragged into the Ramsey saga because he knew any insinuation that he was involved would ruin his career as a reporter. That's reasonable. And I think the same idea can be asked in terms of John Ramsey. Any insinuation that John was involved, couldn't that have ruined his career? He's a CEO, but I mean, it's not like he's a vice president of Lockheed Martin. What if Lockheed Martin think that he was somehow involved? Couldn't that ruin his career? And at that time, his career is sort of really sort of at a high point. Wouldn't he want to protect his career? Isn't he worried about that as well? Thanks a lot, Robin. He also had a prior criminal conviction for that he didn't want to become known. And who knows what that's about? Maybe he was a student. I don't really know what that's about, but that's also kind of understandable. Obviously, he's not a Snow White figure. Like he's not someone who's completely innocent, but how many of us are? And so, but the fact that he's wants to protect himself, someone can say, well, that is a sign of guilt, but somebody else would say, yeah, I understand that. Wolf spent around an hour in a cell before he's eventually let go. That had to have been quite traumatic. Shaken by the experience, he said he didn't feel as though Boulder PD ever considered him a serious suspect. So in a way, it seemed like that was Steve Thomas throwing his weight around a little bit, trying to get information, and then ultimately feeling, you know what, I don't think it is this guy. He said they were simply adhering to the basic protocol of ruling out tips and loose leads while turning the heat up on their lead suspects, John and Patsy Ramsey. But I think Chris Wolf is a good example of the counter to this whole idea of police had Boulder PD had tunnel vision. They refused to investigate anyone else. Yeah, you can see that wasn't the case. Boulder PD even followed up on the whole Santa Claus did it thing. As absurd as that was, I think Bill McReynolds had recently had serious heart surgery. And he actually died something like 5 years after the Ramsey case. Was he supposed to be running up and down stairs? Anyway, that belief was ratified a few weeks later when Wolf went to the police station to ask to see his file. And so think about that. Despite him being quite reluctant, quite resistant, quite not cooperative, he pitches up at the police station and asks to see his file. Did the Ramseys ever do that? Did the Ramseys ever sort of voluntarily arrive at Boulder PD and say, can we see our file? Can we just see what's going on? Like, what do you guys think is going on? And he was told by Commander John Eller they had no interest in him. And there you have it. But that wouldn't be the end of his affiliations. For years, his girlfriend Dilson continued to lobby investigators to re-examine him, believing her accusations were never taken seriously because Boulder PD was so laser-focused on the parents. If they were so laser-focused on the parents, why did they ask him for DNA? They didn't just bring him in for the sort of, out of a sort of perfunctory, just going through the motions. They brought him in and they wanted samples. So they were sort of looking at him as seriously as one could look at him. And then you have it. To make matters worse, the Ramseys also thrust Wolf into the spotlight as one of their leading suspects in their book. And as I've said, they didn't just make passing reference to him, they brought him up a bunch of times. These are all the references in The Death of Innocence. That's I think over a dozen references across all of these pages. It's not like they referred. Can you guys read that? It's not like they referred to him once or twice. There was quite a concerted focus on Chris Wolf in their book. It would be hard to read their book and miss how much the Ramseys were talking about this particular suspect. How would you feel if someone wrote a book about you, saying that you were a suspect in a particular case, and the police didn't even think that you were a suspect? And I guess that was his position, right? So here is another picture of Chris Wolf. As I say, is not Snow White, and he apparently worked, I think, as a stripper. This was Dilson at the bachelorette party in '94, where he was hired to work as a stripper, right? And he was in an on-again, off-again relationship. There's his press badge, right? At the time of the murder, Wolf was trying to build a career as a freelance reporter. John and Patsy rigorously denied killing their daughter, and they didn't cooperate with police either. So you've got to look at not cooperating with the police in context. He didn't. Does that mean he's a suspect? They didn't. Does that mean they're a suspect? Of course, it's different. It was their own daughter. Their own daughter has died, and they want to know, you were in the house, what can you tell us, right? I'm not going to read that part. Dilson to this day is convinced that Wolf was the intruder. She told police that Wolf had been acting erratically and suspiciously before the murder. But you kind of get the idea that he kind of acts erratically. That's kind of his personality. I mean, at one point he's a stripper, and then he's a reporter, and I don't know what he does generally, but taking a shower because you're full of mud, is that acting suspicious? And I think that also is quite interesting. The fact that he arrived back from wherever he was and he was covered in mud, doesn't that tell you outside was kind of wet? You know, outside wasn't dry, to put it in those terms. She found it suspicious that he would often erupt into expletive-laden rants about John Ramsey, Access Graphics, and his business ties with the arms dealer Lockheed Martin. Now, although I think she's wrong, I think Jackie Dilson is wrong to go, well, because he's saying this, it means he's guilty. I do think it's interesting what Wolf was thinking. Wolf was thinking about Lockheed Martin and John Ramsey in a way that I think other people weren't really thinking about. Like, you don't often hear about John Ramsey. You sometimes hear about Access Graphics. Brenda, thank you very much. I know so much about this case now because of this series. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. I've seen your comments quite often, so thanks a lot for that. Okay, let's continue. Speaking out publicly for the first time, Dilson renewed her accusations, painting him as an anti-war radical who harbored a deep-seated hatred for John and Lockheed Martin. Now, that would kind of perhaps tie in with a foreign faction, and we don't like your business in the ransom note. And I think it was John Douglas, who said, whoever wrote this note really hates you, right? And this does correspond in a broad way to that, doesn't it? Dilson sensationally claimed that Wolf believed John and Lockheed were complicit in the deaths of innocent women and children. Now, this to me is where it goes from somewhat interesting, somewhat credible, somewhat, to whoa. Now you're going off the tracks, right? Because what she's saying here is basically that there's some kind of conspiracy with a government institution, and John is one of the sort of agents, I guess, of that. And so what, he killed his own child as part of some kind of government conspiracy. Look at that. She believed that John and Lockheed were complicit in the deaths of innocent women and children in war-torn third world countries, and that this was an act of political retribution. Sorry, that Wolf believed that that was the case. Okay. I don't know. Like, if you think about it, this is political retribution. How is it political retribution? Why would you not kill John if that was what you intended to do? Also, why not kidnap JONBENET and get the money? Doesn't really make sense. And war-torn third world countries. Anyway, in retort, Wolf vehemently denied any involvement in the Ramsey murder to Daily Mail. He's called it deranged fantasy. He also refuted holding any extremist political views, insisting his opinions about American foreign policy fell within the confines of the average Boulder liberal at the time. I think he probably did have I wouldn't say extreme political views, but let's say liberal political views. And probably Dilson just disagreed with them. And because she disagreed with them, she perhaps framed them in an extreme way. Does that make sense? Well, we had 14 super chats, about halfway to go, guys. Do you think we're going to get there? He said, I had absolutely nothing at all to do with the murder of JONBENET. The other thing that you've got to think about is there's a sexual component to what happened to JONBENET. So where does this fit into the political motive, right? He says, I'm not a vigilante. I would never take that kind of action based on political beliefs. He says, I'd certainly never harm a child. And then he says, as far as Jackie, I don't know exactly if she really believes all of this or not. I think there's a number of things going on. And this is where, for me, this is where it becomes quite fascinating. It's where Chris Wolf says, this is why I think Jackie thinks what she thinks, says what she says, believes what she believes. And that to me is kind of fascinating, because it's a psychology within a psychology, if you think about it. And that's why I called why I named this live stream Psychological Patterns, because this is a psychological pattern. You might say, it's not very interesting to me because I don't think Chris Wolf did it. And I don't think this book is very worthwhile reading because I don't think it tells us who did it. But what it does reveal is how some thinking is off track. Not so much that, why it's off track, how it's off track, and why certain people go off track. And we're going to go to that now, right? Remember reading from an article in the Daily Mail. Dilson is on the verge of releasing a self-published book, The Unheard Call. She outright names Wolf as the killer and chronicles their tumultuous relationship. Now, Wolf probably has every right to sue her. It's probably worse what's being said in her book than what was said in the Ramsey book. But he probably feels that this article is enough to just deal with that, because he probably still likes her, which I think he says here. In the book, Dilson accuses Wolf of stalking and threatening her over a period of several years. She also claims he once tried to do that, which he denies. Can you guys read that? When it comes to JONBENET, Dilson's case against Wolf rests entirely on circumstantial evidence and anecdotal accounts. The bulk of her suspicions stem from his odd behavior. So there's no evidence linking him to the crime. According to Dilson, Wolf vanished for several hours on Christmas Day and returned late in the evening in a psychotic state. That could mean there were some substances involved. You know, had he been drinking? Had he been doing something else? Dilson said his bizarre behavior continued when he told her, if you wake up in the middle of the night and I'm not here, I'm just driving around because I can't sleep, right? This is the Chris Wolf version of Gary Oliver saying, I hurt a little girl, and that suddenly becomes all the evidence you'll ever need to convict the killer of JONBENET Ramsey. Sorry, you're going to need a bit more than that, including a DNA match, right? At 5:30 a.m. the following morning, Dilson woke up to the sound of running water. She said Wolf emerged from the shower and put back on the same clothes he'd been wearing the day before, but this time they were covered in dirt. Whoa. Now you've got an analogy. Patsy's wearing the same clothes. He's wearing the same clothes. Patsy's wearing the same clothes. He's wearing the same clothes, but they're covered in dirt. Well, it must be him. Is there anything suspicious about someone putting on the same clothes? Well, a beauty queen putting on the same clothes, some people would say, is very weird, very unheard of. This is a beauty queen who goes to an art class dressed not in a smock or sort of ordinary clothes, but sort of she's all dressed up, right? This is a beauty queen who's always trying to impress other people. Is a kind of stripper living in a trailer, is he gonna care what people think of what he's wearing? That's the difference. Dilson said that Wolf offered no explanation for why his clothes were dirty and left again to go to a coffee shop. Can I offer an explanation? He perhaps was out late at night. Perhaps he drank. It's Christmas night. Perhaps he was intoxicated in some way, tripped and fell in the dirt. Perhaps that's why. When he returned 3 hours later, Dilson said Wolf was rabidly ranting about the MF, the mother effer on the hill, who was selling arms to third world countries and deserved to die. So that the person who deserves to die is John in terms of this interpretation. So why go after JONBENET? And there was a period where John went off on his own, supposedly to the airport. That would have been the best opportunity to do something. If you want to kidnap JONBENET, the best opportunity was when she was on her bike, like that other girl, Charlotte Cena, when she was on her bike cycling sort of outside the Ramsey home. The Ramsey home. Okay, let's go to, so there's a picture of Jackie Dilson as a bit of a younger woman. You can see snow around her. Okay, here's JONBENET. There's Jackie Dilson today. And she says her dealings with Boulder PD left her traumatized and continued to weigh heavily on her mind. It's only late in the day. Well, so I think what she's saying is she's tried to implicate Chris Wolf, and Boulder PD have refused to arrest him, and so she doesn't trust them, or she doesn't like them, or what they're doing isn't right, whatever. So she doesn't like Boulder PD because they're not arresting someone only on the basis of what she's saying. Anyway, going back to the narrative, it was only late in the day that Dilson thought she knew who Wolf was talking about, John Ramsey. That realization came after she sat down to watch the news with Wolf, and leading the program was the murder of a 6-year-old girl who had been found dead in the basement of her family in a well-to-do area known as the Hill. During the segment, Dilson said that Wolf erupted again, accusing John of sexually abusing his daughter and insisting John would soon be going to prison. Well, can I tell you, that is often the first. I've covered this case for a long time, and in my experience, the evolution of someone completely new to the case is that the first person they think committed the crime was John, and that there was a sexual aspect to it. And then when they get to know the case a little bit better, and they know about Patsy, and they know what Patsy has said, and know what Patsy has done, and know that there's a little the hinkiness around the ransom note, to put it mildly, then it goes from thinking John did it to thinking that Patsy did it. And then it evolves from there also along fairly classical lines, right? So for me, him thinking that John did it automatically isn't that strange. I can also put up my hand and say, when I first researched the Ramsey case, my original suspect, I can't remember if it was for 5 minutes or a week, it wasn't very long, was John. I thought, John makes sense as a suspect. But when I had more information about it, I thought, actually, it doesn't make sense because of this and this and this and this and this, right? She said he's been acting strangely for a while, but it was at that moment that I started to think something was inherently wrong here. Now, what she doesn't acknowledge is that he was breaking up with her. That was also what was inherently wrong, right? Wolf admitted to making numerous incendiary remarks about John Ramsey, so he doesn't deny that. And that was after JONBENET's murder became public knowledge, but he questioned Dilson's recollection of events that Christmas. He admitted to leaving her home that day. Now, you can imagine they girlfriend and boyfriend, he leaves her alone on Christmas night. She couldn't have been too happy about that. And then pretty much the aftermath of that was, I'm breaking up with you. And so two things happen for Jackie Dilson that Christmas. Think about it just through her experience. Two things happen. One is she's been looking forward to Christmas with her boyfriend, and he's just not there. He kind of dumps her. And then he comes back and she doesn't know where he was. And then the next thing she finds out, JONBENET's died, which changes Boulder forever in a sense. And what does she do? She puts the two together because he does end up breaking up with her, right? And so in her mind, that those two events are inextricably linked. But are they? And so look at what he says. He admits to leaving her home that day, but claimed to have done so in the late afternoon, returning sometime after dark. Now, I'm in a way got a bit of a problem with that. She says that he went at night, which wouldn't fit him being in the house writing the ransom note from 4 or 5 o'clock onwards. Returning sometime after dark, what time was that? So the timeline here is a little bit iffy. And there you have it. I suspected it. Wolf said he was a marijuana addict at the time, and he would often go out on long drives to aimlessly cruise around, listen to music, and get high. And that's precisely what he did that day. And that would explain him falling in the mud, right? By the way, I just got a email sent to me from a doctor who said, and this was regarding the Gabby Petito case, you're absolutely right. This is from a doctor. You're absolutely right about the symptoms that can be brought about as a result of marijuana. And it was just interesting hearing a doctor say that, when I've seen so many people saying there's nothing to see, marijuana doesn't do anything. And I know after I covered that, a lot of people didn't want to watch my coverage of the Ramsey case, of the Petito case anymore. Kind of interesting when you are told things you don't want to hear, right? How many donations are we at now? Is it 14? No. 14. Okay, looks like we're not going to get there. The goal ends in 11 minutes. Sorry, guys. Suits me to be perfectly honest. Okay, let's continue. Once he returned to Dilson's, he said he stayed there through the night. Wolf could not recall whether or not his clothes were muddy the following morning, but considered they may have been dirty from days of consecutive wear. He believes he first heard about the Ramsey case on the radio on the way to the coffee shop. The Ramseys did not call the police until 5:54 a.m. For hours, the Ramsey case was believed to be a kidnapping before she was found dead by her father late that afternoon. Wolf said the news that a little girl had been snatched from her bed left him feeling agitated, which may have accounted for the erratic mood described by Dilson upon his return. Now, you can probably explain his strange behavior due to the substances he was taking. As for his purported remarks about John Ramsey, Wolf said it sounded like something he would have said. That also sounds authentic, doesn't it? Although he questioned Dilson's timeline. He explained, I think I was pretty peed off by the whole thing. So in other words, he was upset that a child had died and he vocalized it. I think I was commenting histrionically on the whole subject any number of times that day and a number of times after that. But for all I know, I could have made those comments the day after, when it was no longer just a kidnapping or when it was evident that she was actually dead. I don't know which one it was, and I'm pretty sure Jack doesn't know either. Okay. In the months that followed, Dilson continued to meet with investigators and officials throughout Boulder. Her cries went largely unanswered. She claimed to have remembered a series of odd remarks Wolf had made about the Ramseys before the murder, and pointed to an article he'd written, this is quite interesting, in 1995 for the Boulder Business Report about Access Graphics to try and prove premeditation. So he'd written something about Access Graphics. That should be pretty cut and dried. You know, was he saying Access Graphics are corrupt, or Access Graphics are working for a corrupt parent company or something? Dilson's campaign received a second wind in the summer of 1997 when the now infamous Ramsey ransom note was released to the public for the first time. That's the first time that the Ramseys released this ransom note. You know, why not release it immediately if you're trying to catch the intruder? Isn't it because the housekeeper might have recognized the handwriting immediately? Whereas if you allow a couple of months to go by, you might not be as sure, right? The note written on a legal pad included references to John Ramsey's work, bizarre quotes lifted from action films, and there you have it, SBTC. Dilson was convinced the killer's handwriting was Wolf's, so you've got to be careful with that as well. That's a subjective view. So in the same way, you've got to be careful with the housekeeper going, I'm sure that's Patsy's handwriting. And believe some of the political sentiments matched his beliefs. And there you have it. SBTC stood for Santa Barbara Tennis Club, an allusion to a T-shirt her son had given to Wolf that Christmas. Now think about it. Why on earth would you sign some kind of political message? Say, I'm a foreign faction, and is the foreign faction called Santa Barbara Tennis Club? It doesn't really make sense. In a way, it makes sense. You might say, oh, that's where it comes from, but it doesn't really make sense. There's a picture of the two of them. Dilson and Wolf continued to live with one another on and off until 1999. Now, if you think about it, she thought that he was the killer, but they still lived together for another 3 years. Think about that. You think your boyfriend did these horrible things, but then you still live with him. She says the 3 years after JonBenet's murder was spent in fear of her life. Okay. So you lived with him, but you were afraid. Okay. Wolf has suffered with depression because of Dilson's accusations. Says he's often paranoid when meeting new people, fearful they developed a premeditated opinion of him. Dilson alerted, can you guys see that? Dilson alerted Boulder PD, said they'd look into it. She handed in Wolf's leather jacket to be tested for fibers, along with a handbook and journal of his to be compared with the ransom note. And this is where Ashley Banfield says she cannot believe they didn't even test this, right? Lead Ramsey detective Steve Thomas later admitted in a deposition that he was unsure whether the items handed in by Wilson were ever tested. As investigators did not consider her a credible witness. Wilson voluntarily provided investigators with DNA, fingerprints, and handwriting samples in February 1998, February 1998 was a couple of months before the grand jury investigation, hoping to once and for all quash any lingering suspicions about him. So he pitched up there and he voluntarily provided them with that. Did they test that? And so he says, I was tired of being suspected of this and I wanted to do whatever I could to cooperate. Boulder PD were pitching it to me like, we don't think you're guilty of this, but there are people who do think that you're guilty and we need to satisfy their questions regarding you. That makes me think they did test something. I don't know if they need to test DNA and handwriting and fibers, right? I don't think but if they test certainly DNA, that would be exculpatory. And certainly if they test handwriting, I think that would be less exculpatory, but certainly would be as well. And he said that made me more willing to cooperate. So you can see, you can easily cut the story off and say, you know, what made this guy really suspicious was how aggressive he was and he didn't want to cooperate, right? But the full story is ultimately he did cooperate. And in a very cooperative way, like he voluntarily, you know, came into the station and said, can I see my case, right? Wolf said he last spoke to Boulder PD in 2001 before he left Colorado for California and claimed he was told by investigators they were not interested in him. This is quite interesting. Boulder PD have never publicly cleared Wolf, right? Think about it. They publicly cleared Fleet White, I think 3 times or even more. Although it's not Boulder PD, it is Mary Lacey, the district attorney, has publicly cleared the Ramseys, but he has not been publicly cleared. And I think that in a way shows you the difference between blue collar folk and other folk. In 2011, then Police Chief Mark Beckner made assurances that he had been thoroughly investigated. Beckner's comments were prompted after Dilson took out a paid advertisement, right? She really didn't want to give up. She took out a paid advertisement in the Boulder Daily Boulder Camera, comparing the ransom note to a reconstructed version she'd composed using excerpts of Wolf's handwriting lifted from his journals. And we've seen exactly the same thing with Gary Oliva, right? Trying to match his handwriting to the ransom note because some people want to be associated with the Ramsey case. They want to be relevant to it. You've got the same thing with, just trying to think of another case that's like that. John Mark Carr. There's certain people who want John Mark Carr, the story about him, to be taken seriously so that they can be the star of a Ramsey documentary, right? And as far as I'm concerned, Dilson falls into the same category. She kind of wants some kind of significance. She wants something meaningful to come out of all this senselessness in a way. But wanting something to come out of it and it being genuinely relevant is totally different, right? Right? And this is where the psychology within the psychology, I think, is quite interesting, where there are people who are genuinely investigating this case, and there really aren't many of them. People who don't have an agenda, people who are just wanting to know what happened. And then they are totally outnumbered by people who have got fingers in pies and little associations and relationships with various people, which amount to kickbacks and amount to them profiting in certain ways as a result of those relationships, right? And I don't know, it's hard for me to say, but do they not know that they're barking up the wrong tree? Or does this, is it just a delusion that's when you're getting money for your association, you can't actually be honest and say, actually, this doesn't make any sense? Are people incapable of seeing things in a authentic way when their money is tied to a particular outcome? I think it's just quite interesting. And so then you take Dilson. Let's just have a look here. Dilson responded by insisting Wolf's handwriting had been analyzed. There you have it. This is a really important point, right? I'm going to put this in chat just to emphasize it. Now, so if you say, like Ashley Banfield did, well, I'm appalled. They didn't even check this guy's information. Right? I'm appalled, I'm shocked, I'm disgusted. You know, Boulder PD really are as terrible as they say. Really? Are they? Where is that? It's not this one. I think it's this one.
We're not even sure if we tested it. What are your reactions to and I certainly had never heard one of the detectives say, we're not even sure if we tested it. What are your reactions to hearing that list? And I know you already know about it. There's no one who knows more about this case than you, but what's your reaction to this?
Well, one reaction could be, you know what, I know more about this case than anyone, and I know they did test his handwriting and his handwriting didn't match. You know, let's helpfully inform the investigation, right? I know more than anyone about this case, and so I can tell you, and I'm role playing John, and so I can tell you, yeah, you probably don't want to look at Chris Wolf because they did test his handwriting. What does it say? Just analyzed by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and he found that Chris Wolf had not written the note. Now think about that, and think about, doesn't it suit certain people to say, you know, it's actually is actually very compelling? Doesn't it suit John to say that? The other side of that is John might legitimately think that he is a credible suspect. The other side to that is maybe John disagrees. Maybe John says, you know what, I thought his handwriting looked a lot like it. So subjectively and truthfully, I disagree with that. It's very hard for us to talk to this aspect because we can't see it. I don't know whether it's in a book, but we can't see the what the handwriting expert said, although we can see what the handwriting expert decided in the Carnes order. We can see what the handwriting expert thought, because I think it is brought up in the Carnes order. Who's going to go and read up about it? You know, it's where can we find it? Where's the Carnes order? Is it? So if you want to, yeah, go and you can. One easy way to cut through all the clutter is you copy all of this text from the Carnes order and paste it in a Word document and do a targeted search for handwriting, and then just see what they say. If we look at 41 inaccuracies from the Carnes ruling, let's see if there's anything on handwriting. So far, fibers, animal hair, shoe prints, high-tech, wine cellar door, baseball bat, rope, ownership, autopsy report of Michael Dobison, handwriting. Like a targeted search, you would have gotten it very quickly. Let's see. Ransom note. Okay. Yeah, why does the ransom note say use that good Southern common sense? Why is Chris Wolf originally from the South? That's quite an interesting assessment of the ransom note, that the writer does not appear to have been trying to disguise his or her handwriting. That's not what I thought. I thought that they were. Trying to see if there's anything about handwriting here. Yeah, here it is. During the investigation, the Boulder PD and Boulder County District Attorney's Office consulted at least 6 handwriting experts. All 6 experts agreed that Mr. Ramsey could be eliminated as the author of the ransom note. None of the 6 consulted experts identified Mrs. Ramsey as the author. Okay, I'm not going to deal with that. You know, there's not a reference here to what I'm looking for, so that's a little bit unfortunate. Anyway, now the question is, can we get hold of this report from the CBI? And the answer is probably not. For Wolf, Dilson's repeated accusations over the last 30 years have been difficult to deal with. It's shocking to me that so many people would even think I could be responsible. Let's do a quick poll. How many of you here think that Chris Wolf is a serious suspect? And let's just have a look at the poll. 5% say he's a serious suspect. How many of you still think he's a serious suspect? Let's have a look. Anyone? Hi, Katie. Good to see you. Anyone think he's a serious suspect? Ron Chase. There's one. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, so most people, certainly who know this case quite well, don't consider him a serious suspect. It's also interesting to me that you've got Ashley Banfield sort of arriving and kind of going, well, you know, maybe it is this guy after all. Is it? Let's have a look at the rest of that interview.
Yeah, some of the items you mentioned, I didn't know about. I know Jackie came to us early on. We'd hired our own investigators, and she'd come to us, I think, out of frustration with the police, and related pretty much the same thing that you just went through to us, and pretty compelling. And we had hoped that the police would go through. And the problem was that they had decided on day one that it was the parents. I think they decided it was me. That one, the so-called detective that was there that morning said, well, she knew I was a killer because she saw it in my eyes, which is a remarkable talent. But so this is kind of a nuisance to have to deal with in their mind because they already knew the answer. And so I don't know how thoroughly Chris Wolf was looked into. I've met with Jackie personally, not recently, but she's been very persistent in this.
So that's quite interesting. Imagine this. It's 28 years, almost 29 years, and you appearing on a Netflix series, and it's about the investigation into the unsolved murder of your daughter. And you don't know what has been done in terms of Chris Wolf. We've been dealing with this for what, less than 2 hours. And we know that the CBI checked his handwriting. If I was John Ramsey, I would say, wow, I want to see his handwriting for myself. And I also want our experts to look at his handwriting, right? But to say, I don't know, well, maybe you should know, maybe you should find out. It's not that difficult to find out. Maybe he could say on Netflix or to Boulder PD, Chris Wolf is quite compelling. Do you mind if we look at his handwriting? Surely they would then answer, well, we've looked at it. You might say, I'd like to look at it. Okay, well then do that. But to say, I don't know, it kind of beggars belief. I mean, isn't this all about investigating JonBenet? And I mean, to be fair, Chris Wolf doesn't even come up at all as one of the top suspects in the third episode of the Netflix series, which I have yet to sort of deal with as a way of sort of concluding my analysis. I sort of started a series dealing with the Netflix series, but I haven't concluded it. I haven't dealt with what comes up in episode 3. But Chris Wolf doesn't come up as one of the top suspects. And Ashley Banfield mentions that a little bit later on in this interview.
For years. And she seems like a very solid, normal person to me, and very...
So there John is giving her the benefit of the doubt, right? This author who wrote this self-published book, the Boulder PD say they don't regard her as credible. John says, I think she's credible. Now, remember early on, Ashley Banfield said, no one knows this case better than you. The best person to ask is you. And then I said, yeah, but John thought that it could be Santa Claus. And I think the Ramseys implicated the whites at some point. And just trying to think of some of the others. And what he doesn't do is tell you right in the beginning, you know what, the DNA doesn't match. It's sort of all the things that are wishy-washy maybes, and he sort of leaves it to you. What you kind of want to do at this stage, 28 years later, is you want to exclude a potential suspect and then never look at them again. Basically say, and here is a good example, John Mark Carr. You shouldn't be talking about John Mark Carr with regard to the Ramsey case, ever, right? Unless you want to talk about how the DA botched the investigation and had egg all over their faces. But I mean, in a serious interrogation of this case, you shouldn't be talking about John Mark Carr whatsoever, because he pretty much had an alibi, and also his DNA wasn't there, and they had to go and find him in Thailand to bring him back. And within 12 days, he was unarrested, right? And it did appear that all the information he got on the case was publicly available records. And reporters could see that, but the investigators couldn't see that themselves. I'm talking about the district attorney investigators at the time. And this is what I mean by, to make the case easier, you need to get rid of the fluff. And part of the fluff is John Mark Carr, right? But if you keep coming back to the same thing and saying, let's come back to the Ramsey case and reinterrogate literally everyone all over again, just not the Ramseys, right? Then I think you're a sort of a baby kindergarten investigator. Like your reasoning has got to sharpen at a certain point. In the same way that I said right in the beginning, I initially suspected John for 5 minutes or not very long, and then I suspected somebody else. If I'm still suspecting John today, well then I haven't come very far in my investigation, right? By the same token, if you're still suspecting Chris Wolf, then and here you have a reporter making it into a news story, you obviously don't know very much about this case.
Her story is very consistent in terms of what she believes and what her observations were. So I don't know.
John, Do you have any idea, and I get it, I know that police work in secrecy, it's part of preserving an investigation, but we're 28 years in at this point. Do we know if the new and invigorated cold case team and anybody else in the Boulder PD who we've started to feel like they care a lot more about really solving this case, do we know if they're looking at any of her evidence? Did they keep any of the evidence that she turned over? Are they even asking Chris Wolf?
Should they? Should an invigorated investigation be looking at Chris Wolf? And I understand the apologia side of things, which is we can name 30 people, and if you don't investigate all 30 of them, even though they're all going to be false starts and dead ends, if you didn't investigate all 30 of them, then you're just unreasonably focusing on someone else. Okay, we've investigated all 30. Okay, here's another 30. Can you investigate those? Oh, we only investigated 29 of them. Oh, wow, you're really unfairly focusing on us. There's also a point where you start unfairly focusing on things you shouldn't focus on. A good example is in the McCann case where I don't know how many sightings there were. Was it 10,000? Should you be going to Morocco and Australia and Argentina to investigate where someone said, I saw a little girl walk around the corner, I think that could be Madeleine McCann. If you didn't go and investigate that, is that you wrongly fixated? Because that's craziness. I mean, I can say, I can go to my window over there and say, and manufacture and say, well, I think I see someone walking below the window. I think you need to come and investigate this. You know how expensive it would be to do that, right? And so where we are 28 years later, I think you need to sort of narrow things down. And the sign of a legitimate investigation over time is that it does that, right? The sign of a inauthentic, fake investigation is one that's still like this, where it's like, oh, it could be anybody. You know, what we need to do is test the DNA, and it could be any person in the world. There's going to be a DNA match. You know, for all we know, it could be someone running around the Arctic. That's where the DNA match is going to come from. No, it's more than likely someone who lived in Boulder and is American, right? More than likely, right?
He's alive for his DNA today.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very good question, and it's one I'll pose to them. We met with the chief of police and his staff a month or two ago, and had a good meeting. But as you say, they're very cautious to disclose what they're doing, which is, I understand why they do that. But that's a good question.
Do you have any idea if do you have any idea why this particular story seems to have been somewhat buried? I mean, it wasn't in the Netflix documentary that recently came out, which has been sort of the new generation's introduction to your daughter's case. Any idea why it just sort of fell by the wayside?
No, you know, we had 4 or 5 people like this come to us, like Jackie, with pretty credible circumstantial information that made that candidate look very interesting. Chris Wolf was one of them. I don't know. That's a good question. I think, you know, one of the people that had come to our attention was Gary Oliva, and he.
So you heard Ashley Banfield saying, you know, no one knows this case better than you. And have you noticed just in this interview how often he says, I don't know. I don't know whether evidence was tested. I don't know about this and I don't know about that. Do you notice that?
He was in the news about the time this Netflix documentary was put together, just been released from prison. And he, you know, on circumstantial stuff, he was pretty compelling as well. So I think Chris Wolf just kind of got lost in the chaos. And
well, Jacqueline Dilson has this book coming out, and it's certainly getting a lot more attention now. And you know, all it takes is to match the DNA that they have now been able, the integrity of it is small, but that can be worked with to match that to an actual person, and who knows if they're doing that. John, will you come back again when we find?
So think about what we're talking about. This is a DNA case, and they've got the DNA, and why don't they just test Chris Wolf's DNA? And that's how they're going to solve the case. If the DNA matches Chris Wolf, then he did it, and if it doesn't, then he doesn't mean he didn't do it if it doesn't match. Gary Oliva, it's a DNA case. If the DNA matches Gary Oliva, then he did it, and if it doesn't, then does it mean he didn't do it? How does it work? Anyway, let me wrap up this story. For Wolf, Dilson's repeated accusations over the last 3 years have been difficult to deal with. He says, it's shocking to me that so many people would even think I could be responsible. I would never have any motivation to do anything like that. And then there he is again. And then he says he actually still loves her. Despite what has happened, he still loves her. And then we get this little insight. I think that's the book that she wrote. Yeah, it is. Why do you think Dilson accuses him? And he says, this is his answer. You know, why does she keep accusing you? What's going on? And he says, Dilson was essayed as a child. You can imagine what happened to her, and then what happened to her again on Christmas, which was traumatic, you know, him breaking up with her or him dumping her that night. And then also that Christmas was the story about what happened to the little girl. It probably was traumatizing to her. It probably triggered a lot of memories of what happened to her. And so in that sense, it's personal, right? So she says, Wolf believes that because of her own trauma, Dilson developed a psychological attachment to the Ramsey case that has developed into a fixation, right? What do you guys think of that explanation? What do you think of that explanation? He added that he hadn't always been the best boyfriend to Dilson, and the pair was in the process of breaking up. Look at that. When JONBENET was murdered, and he may have accidentally scorned her. I'm not quite sure what that means, right? But that's the other side, is the pair was in the process of breaking up when JONBENET died. And so she's traumatized on like a multiple of levels. The trauma that she had to begin with, the trauma of what happened to JONBENET triggering her own trauma, and then the trauma of her boyfriend leaving her. And she probably in a way wants to believe this guy that doesn't love her anymore is not just a bad guy, but a really, really, really bad guy. And that her life is a lot more meaningful than it really is, because he's not just a bad guy that's leaving her, he's a bad guy that did something significantly bad that the whole world should know about. And that then makes her, it sort of validates her position, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, that is probably what you're talking about. He theorized, I loved her, she was good to me, and she was a good girlfriend, but it wasn't working. The main reason it wasn't working was because I was incapable of really making a good living. And that sounds like an honest explanation. I mean, there was a period where I was a freelance writer as well, and I struggled, and my relationships also struggled as a result. And he says, I couldn't do anything for her that I wanted to, and she was dissatisfied with that. From there, a lot of other things started to not work very well. We were breaking up, and I think she was angry with me and resentful toward me about wanting to leave her. And that is the bottom line. He wants to leave her, and she's fragile in another sense. and then he leaves her essentially over Christmas, and then he's kind of in an unstable place, perhaps due to marijuana as well, and there's all of this animus directed towards the Ramseys that also kind of triggers with her as well. And he says, I think somewhere she conflated me wanting to break up with her with JONBENET being murdered. Right? That's over here. Incredibly, despite her allegations, Wolf says he still loves and misses Dilson and believes her to be his one true soulmate. For Dilson, who is married, the feelings are not mutual. She says, I'm scared to death about him. I sleep with a gun next to my bed. I must say, excuse me, if you're scared of him, I don't know if writing a book accusing him of a crime is the way to go. But I mean, that's, everyone can do what they want, I guess. Trying to hold him accountable has taken up the last 30 years of my life. I want him behind bars. I want this nightmare to finally be over. And then to this day, Wolf is one of only 2 people to have been detained in connection with JONBENET's death. The second was John Mark Carr. I don't think he was detained for long. I think he was detained for an hour. And there you have it. Yeah, this article also talks about in 2008, attorney Mary Lacey wrote a letter to John saying the new DNA evidence had cleared him and their son Burke of any wrongdoing. Well, didn't the DNA clear Gary Oliver? Didn't it clear John Mark Carr? Doesn't it clear Chris Wolf? Because he gave DNA samples. Lacey formally apologized for the cloud of suspicion the Ramseys lived under for years. Now, what is really interesting, and that's what's in the members only section, is I call it a history lesson. It's basically, we often tend to think about the main story to do with the Ramseys being the 23rd of December, Christmas Day, and the day after Christmas, and then also the 1st of January when they gave their interview, then the interrogation with the police that John and Patsy gave, the first one on the last day of April 1997, and then June 1998. And then we think, and then there was the grand jury decision in October 1999. We tend to think that's the story. And then we forget about what happened in 2000 and 2003, the Wolf lawsuit and the Carnes order. And then there was a repercussion to the Carnes order because some people studied the Carnes order and then drew inferences from that. So I can't help seeing what Alex Hunter did, where he said there's not sufficient evidence. Someone took their cue from that, and I think that informed a lot of the Carnes order. Then the Carnes order informed Mary Lacey's decision to apologize to the Ramseys, and that was in 2006 going into 2008. And then how many years after that? 5 years later, it turned out that the grand jury had voted to indict the Ramseys after all. I wonder what Judge Khan thought when she found that out. I wonder what Chris Wolf thinks about that, because he doesn't mention it here. It does say here, let's have a look. Lacey's somewhat controversial vindication. So it's not just a vindication, it is somewhat controversial, as so much is in the Ramsey case. Okay, I think that is it. There's the ransom note. Let's see where we are with our goal. Where are we? Goal. Is it 14 out of 30? Goal ended. 14 out of 30. Okay, well, I'm going to take a couple of questions, but I'm definitely going to cut this short. So if we reach the goal, maybe I would have done 10 or 20 minutes. Now I'll do maybe 3 minutes. Let's have a look at some of your questions. Anyway, I want to thank a lot of you guys for being here. 520 guys in chat. I might actually do a true crime news review this Monday and maybe next Monday, just because I'm not going to be that, what's the word, present on YouTube for the next couple of days. I've got some triathlons I'm going to be doing and other stuff going on. So I might look out for a true crime news review on this Monday and next Monday. If there's any news in the Ramsey case, we can talk about that. But I will be talking about that Indian American girl that went missing in the Dominican Republic. That's also an accident foul play scenario. I've definitely got my thoughts on that. But that's also quite an interesting case. There's also sort of news that has come out in the Koberger case with the 911 call that's been released, and also where you can really hear just how traumatized one of the housemates was. And then also the Delphi video. I mean, to me, that was quite chilling to watch, definitely quite chilling to watch. Did Chris Wolf have an alibi? Not really. Not actually sure. That's quite a good question. I guess it depends what your time limit is. So from when to when? Yeah, I mean, that's quite a good question. If he went out partying, surely other people saw him. If he went driving around smoking marijuana, probably no one saw him. So it's possible that he doesn't have an alibi. But then the housekeeper and her husband don't have an alibi either. She said she was sleeping upstairs and he was sleeping downstairs in the basement. They don't have alibis either. But then does Patsy, John, and Burke, do they have alibis? So it's kind of one of those questions. Amanda says, what about the pillow? Good question. What is that pillow doing on the kitchen counter? It could be that JonBenet couldn't sleep. I think they mentioned this in the CBS docuseries, that she couldn't sleep and she walked downstairs with a pillow and snagged a piece of pineapple. That's one scenario. Another scenario could just be it's not a very tidy house and the pillow was in the lounge or wherever. And there could be another scenario where just as the flashlight is sort of erect on the counter saying, hey, look at me, and just as the ransom note is staged and maybe the flashlight is staged, remember it's wiped down, maybe the pillow is there to say, hey guys, let's all look at the kitchen. We need to look at the kitchen. And if you're looking at the kitchen, where aren't you looking? Well, you're not going to be looking as closely at JonBenet's bedroom. You're not going to be looking as closely at the basement, right? You're not going to be looking in other places that perhaps you should be looking. So, yeah, I mean, it is quite a good question. Ronche says, I believe that Wolf did it, but I can also be wrong too. I think you are wrong. I think... what is Wolf's motive and what evidence connects him to the case? So, like, if you wanna put Chris Wolf on trial, right? Do you think you're going to get a conviction? So, literally, if you didn't have the Ramseys, the subject of the grand jury investigation, and you had Chris Wolf, the subject, do you think you would have got an indictment and it would have led to a trial? Okay, now what's going to implicate him? A story of a spurned ex-girlfriend? I don't think so. I'm not going to talk about contents of the suitcase. I heard on the radio an ad where they were saying, it's not what you look at that matters, but your ability to see clearly. And I noticed that's very true with this case. There are people who can't seem to tell the difference between evidence that you should be looking at and evidence that's not really relevant. And if you this late in the game and you can't do that, then it's very hard to present a case to you because your thinking is fragmented. You've got to think in a cohesive, integrated way where all of the things sort of come together, not just random fragments all the time. What about this? What about that? No, put it together. Where are you guys like watching this sort of thing that it's so front and center in your mind? Blue Lotus says, I watched the playlist. It's very, very thorough. It is. Kina White, Steins is S-T-I-N-E-S, right? Details matter. Yeah, how weird is that? Good question. Good question. How weird is it? Adam, I don't really think you want to be here, right? McRamble says you can't pick and choose the evidence you consider. You must analyze all the evidence and the suspect needs to fit it all. Although that's true, I don't think you consider all the evidence. How can I put it? You don't start with all the evidence and you end up with all the evidence. So I'll give an example. I think at some point, someone burnt paper and shoved it through the mail slot of the Ramsey home. And you might say, wow, is that related to the case? No, it's not. So that's something you can kind of put in a box and say, we don't really need to deal with that again. Of course, if you don't know the case very well, then yeah, you need to figure out all the things you don't know and think about them. But if you do know the case really well, you need to start having the boxes that mean something and then the boxes that don't mean something. So, for example, if you're going to talk about a stun gun versus a railway track, are you going to keep both of those in play sort of forever? Or at some point, do you say, I think it's this one and not that one, or I think it's this one, but not that one? Thanks a lot, Sarah. I think that's as far as we're going to take it. My voice is definitely breaking in a way, so I think I'm going to excuse myself. Thank you, everyone that has been here. Remember, I've just posted a really long members-only analysis. I'm really happy with it, and I really think it's very interesting and leads you down all sorts of, not rabbit holes, but sort of thought alleyways. That's 28 minutes long on members only. I've also posted chapter 23, part 2 on Patreon. And one of the aspects that chapter deals with is analysis I've completely forgotten about. Even though I wrote the book, that chapter deals with why the Fernies fell out with the Ramseys. And if you'd asked me 2 or 3 days ago, why did the Fernies fall out with the Ramseys? I would have been like, I should know this. And so when I narrated a book that I wrote, but some time ago, it was really interesting reviewing that, and it really is actually quite interesting. Is there anyone here that knows why the Fernies fell out with the Ramseys over something very, very specific? Thanks, Jewel. Appreciate it. Okay. Red Becky, thanks very much. Brian says, you really are the active resistance. Thanks very much. Bridget, good to see you. Okay, guys, that's it from me. I think I'm going to be skedaddling, but thank you for being here. It's been quite an interesting live from the perspective of seeing you guys. So who knows, maybe I'll do a Q&A, proper Q&A into the future. So look out for that. Take care, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.